Greetings, music fans. I'm Chris Vaneman, Dean of the School of the Arts at Converse University, and I'm joined today by my old friend John Concklin, who is the new music director of the Spartanburg Philharmonic. And John, we've talked before in this kind of context, but we've never talked in this role with you as the new permanent music director. So congratulations, officially for the upteenth time on behalf of Spartanburg. Welcome to the community.
Thank you. Thank you.
And one of the things that I think struck me as interesting, that I think a lot of our patrons would find interesting too, is the orchestra was spent the last 2 years searching for a conductor. So the orchestra had a new conductor every concert for the last 2 years. You came in and did one of those in the spring of 22. You did another one in the fall of 22. Obviously, they were fantastic, which is why you're here today. But it strikes me that it must be a different sort of thought process, perhaps, as you're approaching a rehearsal, as you're approaching a season, now that you know that the orchestra is yours, that you're the one leading this group for the next years to come. So could you tell us a little bit about what it's like and what the things that you're thinking of as you approach this first rehearsal coming up tonight, this concert coming up this Saturday in this season?
Sure. So I have sort of, a unique view on it in the sense that I started in the back of the viola section. And so over the course of the summer, I've been thinking about what was my experience there, and thinking about, well, what did I want from a conductor while I was thinking about being in the section for a very long time, right? So my roles have been from guest conductor, from violist, and then to guest conductor, in which guest conductor, your sort of job is only to the concert, and then, things fall off after that. And then as a music director finalist, you begin sort of expanding that global view. And now all of a sudden, once I started thinking about the role, now we start thinking about, chunks of years at a time. And so 3 years or even 5 years, the centennial is out there for us to begin thinking about. And then the centennial is also a moment to think about what are the next 100 years of Spartanburg Philharmonic look like. And then that actually opens the doors to a lot of different sort of things. What kind of orchestra do we want to be? What do we want to sound like? What kind of identity do we want to have? And then that affects the rehearsal process, because then you're no longer just thinking about putting on a good concert. You're also thinking about growth and maturity of the orchestra. What are the types of things we want to explore? How do we want to sound? And over time, you sort of build that. I mean, it's a collaborative process. The orchestra is going to have input into it, of course, board, staff, and of course, audience members have. And so I'm sort of looking forward to getting started and beginning basically with sort of the question of what do we want to be when we grow up. Mm-hmm. So the thought is by the 100th anniversary, we'll sort of have a really good idea of what we want the next century to look like. But I personally am taking the next few years to ask the question of anybody who will answer it. What do you want from Spartanburg Philharmonic? What do we want to be? What's going to be sustainable for us moving into the future?
And in a sense, this concert's program, I bet, has kind of this sort of pivot towards the new, pivot towards what we're going to be, one of the things that you might think that we would want to be as an orchestra over the course of the next years. So you want to talk for a little bit about the program and how it reflects where it is that you see the orchestra going, as well as where it is now.
Sure, yeah. And so the first program is always an interesting one. I sort of went back into the history of first programs. It's sort of like presidential inaugurations. What do people say? What kind of signals do they send? You really want to take some time to think about it. Luckily, there was a suggestion from the staff, and it was pretty much locked in to do Dvorak's New World Symphony, which of course was on any list that I would have to start.
Yeah. Why is that? Why did they suggest it, and why would it be on your list anyway?
So there's the numerological, which is fun. It's our 95th season, our 95th birthday. It's Dvorak's 9th symphony. It's Opus 95, and opuses are, of course, collections of works. So it was his 95th collection. And then the funny thing is that it used to be called Symphony Number 5, and then the people who make these decisions decided to call it Symphony Number 9. So there's lots of 9s and 5s in there, which really works well. But more to the point, the piece is about hope and curiosity and excitement for the future of what's sort of around the bend. And the reason is because Dvorak was a famous European composer, but at the turn of the 19th century into the 20th century, the United States was looking to define its arts cultures, especially musically. And at the time, the in vogue thing was that composers were looking into the folk tunes of what their cultures were. So Dvorak was a Czech composer. He was reflecting on Czech folk song. Germans are doing the same thing, Italians, English. And so the thought was, well, we need to do that in the United States. But we didn't really have a famous composer who was trained. And so he was brought over to establish a new music school and to investigate this. And he was paired with a man named Harry T. Burleigh, who was the descendant of former U.S. slaves. And Harry T. Burleigh introduced him to spirituals, and then also Native American folk song, because Dvorak traveled the nation, and then the American Protestant hymnal tradition, which is sort of all mixed up in this. And Dvorak came away saying, everything is here. The United States has exactly what it needs. These are the things it needs to base its future music in. And he wrote this symphony, the Ninth Symphony, from the New World, as sort of a two-part thing. The first is from the New World back to Europe, saying, look at this rich tradition that the United States has, and also as a model for future American composers of what he thought they could base their music in. And it turns out that 130 years later, he's absolutely correct.
Right. And as I recall, he wrote an article for, I believe, Harper's Magazine that was, in fact, a set of instructions for American composers saying, hey, stop looking to Europe for all of your inspiration and instead be aware of all that you have in your country. And so this piece was kind of proof of concept.
Yeah, we know it really well, so it sounds familiar, but over the course of the summer, I revisited it and realized, for me at least, that the piece, you're hearing all of these things through Dvorak's ears. And so at that point, all of this becomes new and exciting. So every single new idea is this sort of kid in a candy store thing that Dvorak's like, look at what I can do with this new material. And so over the course of the symphony, you start with sort of a very traditional European first movement, but then it kind of evolves and he begins to sort of dispense with, I don't need this European form, I don't need this European harmony. And he sort of lets the things evolve into over the course of the piece, that when you get to the end of the piece, you feel like you have actually discovered the entirety of American music. It's sort of like getting to the Pacific Ocean or getting to the Rockies, like, oh my gosh, we've made it. Which then really makes it an appropriate piece to start out a 95th season with a new music director looking at a centennial. It fits really, really well. And so for me, anytime I do Dvorak's New World Symphony, I insist that we can't do music from Europe. It has to be from the New World, because otherwise it sort of defeats the purpose, right? And so we are fortunate to have a really, really talented and underrated composer on staff, our composer in residence, Peter BK. I could not imagine not starting the season off with a commission by him. Peter, I've known his music for quite a while and have wondered why it's not more in the mainstream. He has a wonderful ear for texture, which a lot of composers don't have.
And by texture, what we're talking about there is the interaction among the different instruments, the way the composer layers them together and chooses tone colors and things like that, right?
That's right. So you've got melody, you've got harmony, and you've got rhythm. And then the fourth dimension is sort of how they all sort of mix together. And so you can have those same things twice in a row, but if you mix it up, it sounds completely different. Those things are really exciting. He does those things really well, and he's written fanfare for us. And I got the piece 2 weeks ago, the final version, which is
okay.
Peter's looking at me funny over there.
Slipped in under the deadline
right.
there.
No, he met the deadline,
Okay.
and I dove into it and thought, I gave him very few guidelines or requests, and he met it perfectly. It's a piece that you're gonna like upon first listen, it also will sound familiar. It's one of those things that you think you can place it. What is this thing from? I feel like I know this. And that's a really true gift to be able to do that from a blank page to a completed work. It's kinetic. In other words, it's sort of really fast moving, and that can be difficult to write fast music and sort of keep it cohesive. But he's written something for us that I'm excited to perform and take it to other places. It's a really, really fun piece.
And so this was a piece that was finished around 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And people are getting a brand new experience with this.
That's right. They're going to get something that they cannot get anywhere else. It's impossible to get anywhere else. And we're going to discover it, like Dvorak discovered. We're going to discover it as an orchestra, as an audience, all together in this one moment, which I think is something really special to start off the 95th season with.
Yeah, that there is an element of history being created in that sort of experience, isn't there?
The second piece that we're doing is a piece by Xavier Foley. Xavier is a fellow at Lannan, like me. When I first moved back to the area, he was graduating high school, but my first job was with the Georgia Symphony and to sort of manage the youth orchestra. And I knew about this kid named Xavier Foley, and everyone was saying, this kid is amazing. He's going to go on to do stuff. And I sort of was able to keep awareness of what he was doing. There is good bass players, there are great bass players, and there's Xavier up here kind of with the greats, truly. And he's also a composer, and he's written this. It defies explanation, but it's a soul-based concerto, and when I say soul-based, I mean like 1970s soul bass. It's something that is unique, and it's hard to qualify unique, because unique already means one of a kind, but I will qualify it and say that it is wildly unique and something that you cannot get anywhere else. For what he's trying to achieve, and he plays so well. And so these two pieces, Peter's piece and Xavier's piece, are the very model of what I think Dvorak was saying was possible. And you're not finding this in Europe anywhere.
And now this would be the second or third performance of Soul Bass, is that correct?
I think it's actually the third. So he did it in Atlanta, premiered in Atlanta with Jonathan Hayward, and then I think they did it in Baltimore. But we're
so this is pretty darn close to brand new as well.
That's right.
And you'd alluded to the fact that you rarely encounter a really great bass player of this level, and it's true that it is a difficult instrument to play as a soloist. There's a reason that bass is usually holding down the bottom of an ensemble, and to hear it play and to see it played in a really virtuosic way is a very different kind of concert experience that I think probably most of us haven't had the chance to see.
Yeah, it's kind of like driving a semi truck on a NASCAR thing and winning the race. I mean, it's wild, because you can't possibly think that an instrument that large could be played that fast and also with that lyrically, and somehow he is able to just conjure magic out of the instrument on top of writing a piece that just is him, and so it accentuates all the things that he likes and that he's good at. And so we're getting something. It's like getting a chef to make you their favorite dish. You're getting something really special.
So the things that he likes and that he's good at, tell us a little bit about what they are.
There is a particular just attitude to the piece that when you're sitting there, when I'm sitting there with the score reading through it, it just makes me feel like I just begin to sort of like move a little bit to it, because it just has this like thing that it's like I can't. There's not it defies words, and now I just need to move my body a little bit, which. For those people that know me, I'm not necessarily a dancer, but so that in itself, if you're getting me,
John's wife is cackling to herself as she's watching this.
If you're getting me, who's looking at it in silence, to move their body, I can only imagine that when the piece comes alive, people are just going to start wanting to feel like they need to move. And in a concert hall, in a classical concert hall, that is like the pinnacle of achievement, is if you get people to start moving their bodies or get them to stand up just because they feel like they're so moved, they just have to stand up or do something. It's just the way that he writes, and he has sort of a particular ear. There's a sound to it. There's like a 1970s TV sound to it. And then you also get sort of the sound of a solo bass has a grit to it and a soulfulness to it that some treble instruments, and by treble I mean like flute or viola even, or violin or piano, don't necessarily get. And it's because he's having to project. And so when you get that sound plus sort of the way that he's written the piece, you get this like magical 20 minutes in which, it defies explanation. I'm at a loss for words about how cool the piece is. Yeah.
So there's this sort of this grittiness combined with a sort of bounciness, and it sounds like it's going to make us want to dance.
Yeah.
The title, I believe, is an allusion to Soul Train, which was, the 60s, 70s, 80s dance show that was a syndicated dance show. It used to be on Saturday afternoons where I grew up, at least. Kind of like American Bandstand, except with better hair.
That's right.
So yeah, I mean, it looks like a very exciting sort of thing. And it probably, I shouldn't say probably, because in fact, this is totally a leading question. It certainly shares some of those qualities with the Dvorak of introducing American elements into traditionally European forms, pouring some very new wine into those very old bottles, if you will, I guess.
It's not something that's easy to do. I mean, abstractly, it's easy to do, but often the things don't work.
Yeah, it's easy to want to do it. It's easy to have the idea. To carry it off successfully is very tough.
Usually one will take over the other. And this is sort of, I mean, it does speak to a lot of the challenges with inclusivity and diversity that we have in the music world, but also not in the music world, is that one often takes over the other, and truly getting them to work together is sort of the art of it. Dvorak gets it, Peter gets it, and Xavier gets it, and you get this thing in which 1 + 1 all of a sudden equals 3, which is what makes it special, which is why we're still playing Dvorak 130 years later. I promise, if there are basses alive that can play this piece, we'll be playing it 100 years from now, and I'm pretty sure we're going to be playing Peter's piece if I have anything to do with it. There's particular harmonies that go with it. So we talked about this sort of beforehand. There's sort of the pentatonic idea, which the pentatonic is sort of a fancy music word for defining the harmonies from which most folk songs across most cultures are based.
Yeah. And so we're bringing this up, by the way, because, one of the things that, having written the program notes, I know that I was talking about pentatonic melodies in Dvorak, and it's something that everybody always refers to as these pentatonic melodies. I know we encounter a few of them, bouncing in and out of Xavier Foley's piece as well. And it occurred to me that, okay, if you're a normal person and you're watching this sort of thing, musicians are constantly doing this. We're breaking off into these little specialized vocabulary words, and you have to hope that we just go on and change the subject before you fall asleep if you're a normal person. And so it's like, we should explain what pentatonic is. So pentatonic, it's essentially how you choose the pitches to make your melodies, and sometimes the harmonies out of, right?
Yeah, it's a way that music, it's a technical term. So pentatonic, so penta 5, tonic, sort of home base, if you will. So 5 pitches which define home base. You would never really, when we're sitting around listening to music, we don't like, okay, well, that's pentatonic and that's 5, or whatever the case may be. But when you take a look at the music, you can begin to identify that melodies or harmonies are based around those 5 pitches, and they sort of, it has a particular sound to it. So most spirituals have some basis in the pentatonic scale. Most popular music has a basis in the pentatonic scale. Bernstein, going back to some of these Harvard talks, was insistent that it was the most basic form of melody, in that he said that children use that with the nanny nanny boo boo, which is pentatonic. Mm-hmm. And so he thought that was the basis of all music, basically. And to some extent, I think he's right, because it's sort of a natural way. It's an easy way to sing. There's not sort of extra notes in there. Mm-hmm. You're sort of limited to a small range, which most people who aren't trained can definitely sing within those 5 notes. It's just sort of passed down from generation to generation. And so songs are sort of crafted this way, whether we know it or not.
Right. And you talked about Dvorak interacting with Harry T. Burleigh, and Burleigh introducing him to a lot of African-American spiritual repertoire.
Right.
And so Dvorak would have encountered these great melodies that were based on pentatonic scales when he was hanging with Burleigh and exchanging ideas, right?
The New World Symphony does not exist without Harry T. Burleigh. It is completely different and not successful, probably, unless Harry T. Burleigh is educating Dvorak on the ins and outs of spirituals. And there is a harmony, but there is also sort of a form, but there's also sort of the intangible of understanding the source of them. There is a longing, there is a hope, and Dvorak would have intuitively understood it, but the experience of those things, they feed the music, right? So pentatonic is just a way of describing it. There are pentatonic melodies from Czechoslovakia as well, or now the Czech Republic, that are pentatonic, but they have different sort of contexts to them. And so you can hear the way that Dvorak sets them. He does not change them and does not make them European. He begins to just let them be the way they are, which is why I think American audiences just intuit this piece. They understand what it is because it's in our history. We sort of grow up. It's sort of like Italians listening to Italian music. They go nuts because they just get it, right?
Uh-huh. The way you get in the cab in Rome or Milan or something like that, and the cab driver is playing opera and singing along.
That's right. Uh-huh. And they just know, right? Same thing with this piece. I think of it as an American piece. Now, there are Europeans who Europeanize it, which from a musical standpoint, I can understand. But as American, you sort of leave that aside and let the piece be what we want it to be. But that's the beauty of art, is that you can have 2 different truths at the same time.
And especially that's the beauty of a really great piece of art like this, is that there's different ways of looking at it, and they both can be valid.
Yeah.
And so what we can expect this Saturday is a truly American reading of the New World Symphony. Is that fair to say?
I think so. I've been trying to approach it from, all the learnings of the past few years of how we hear things and what we prioritize and what's important, and not prioritizing sort of Europeanness, and attempting to bring out the things that make it what the piece was meant to be, was to sort of highlight the things that weren't being highlighted. It's showing if these things have value, let's value them and build a school around that instead of importing things from afar, right? Mm-hmm. And so, some of it's going to be collaborative because the orchestra is going to bring things to the table, and we haven't even started, so I'm looking forward to that. But also the other pieces that we're performing are going to affect the way that we play it. So the Peter's...
And to be clear, Dvorak is coming last.
That's
so
right.
We're hearing the Peter Kay piece first to start things off with that sense of energy and kineticness. And then we're moving on to the dancingness of soul bass. And then we're arriving at Dvorak.
I'm hopeful that it's going to be a Dvorak that even if you know the piece, it will be different for you because of the context of what came before, and also the way that the orchestra is just going to be playing it because of all the other things that we're playing on the piece. So hopefully it has a little bit more bop to it. It has a cleanliness that Americans like, sort of an on-timeness that Americans really value, a soul to it that, I've been revisiting some recordings, both known and unknown, for Europeans, and there's just something that doesn't work for me in them. So hopefully we get something that does not exist, has not existed before, and then hope maybe not exist afterwards too. So excited. We're really excited to get started.
And it'll be a bop and it'll have some soul.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm very excited to anticipate this concert. It's going to be a really great time. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody this Saturday at 7 o'clock. Right, Peter? I always get the time wrong on these things. 7 o'clock, everybody. We'll see you there. And then there's a champagne toast afterwards, right? What could be better? All right. So thank you so much. Looking forward to it. And folks, see you on Saturday evening.